We've had really amazing presentations today and really addressing a lot of kind of some complex technical issues. And I thought what I would do in my talk is try to summarize a lot of this stuff, not so much technically, but try to put this in a context in which we can try to understand this as not just as engineers or scientists or artists, but as humans and as people, as citizens, as folks, and think about what this stuff, what the implications of this stuff are. So I was, I guess, being the resident artist in the group, I was tasked with the topic of bioprinting in art and design. Next slide. We're missing this slide. I think we're really, part of what we're doing is, this talk is really kind of art and design and bioprinting. So really seeing how those things interact with each other. So today we've looked at a lot of things that, I think it's this really interesting moment right now where we have incredible advances in our modeling software. That's something we haven't talked about much, but really none of this stuff would be, all this bioprinting stuff, it all starts in our modeling software for the most part. Without that, it's hard to do much of anything. It's a common thing people overlook about anything with 3D printing. So we have really great new technologies and then incredible advances in biology, and our understanding of biology. So I think all this kind of adds up to, I think it's hard to not see this as a real potential revolution in technology. So try to understand, like, well, what does this mean as a potential revolution? So I guess being steeped in the liberal arts, I try to look historically at this and look back to previous revolutions. While the technologies are very different, we kind of have the same thing. It's this conflux of, in the Industrial Revolution, we have this conflux of steam power, really great advances in mechanics and machines, and just the ability, the invention of the blast furnace, which gives us our source material in an abundance that we didn't have before. And all these things add up together to really create a revolution in so many senses of the word. It radically restructures where people live. Everybody moves like from an agrarian life into this city life. And we're clusters of people in the cities, which changes our social structures. It changes the way disease spreads. It changes politics. It changes the fact that we need building codes now. The way that we manage populations becomes very different. It used to be, you manage your population by, you go out to this farm and say, give me this percentage of your harvest, or we beat you. Now it's like, oh, now we need so many people in this city to populate to supply a workforce of this number. So it's a much more complex managing thing. So and this wasn't always great. People talk about, like, oh, it's a revolution, awesome, let's all go. Or people get really excited about disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies suck. They disrupt things. It's a pain in the ass. A lot of people lose in this. People who are excited about disruptive technologies are usually the ones who feel they're in a position to capitalize on it. So I think when we're on the edge of these things, we really need to think critically about them, and not just like, yeah, this is great. This stuff is great. I'm not trying to like throw a wet blanket on this, but let's think about this in a smart way. So these are two like real critics of the industrial era in the arts and crafts movement. These guys, I've been really interested in their work, primarily by reading a contemporary architect and theorist named Lars Spivak. So next slide. That pattern that we see in the background is one of William Morris's. So yeah, Ruskin made the point, we have all this amazing technology. We can make anything we want, but we're not making good people. We're kind of destroying people in this process of making all these wonderful things. So some of their critiques of industrialization were that mass-produced objects were lacking in variety or quality. These chairs are all crappy, right? That's what we get. There's also this separation of design and making that's very alienating to the worker, right? Now the guy putting together this chair, he's not excited about this chair. He's not invested in this chair. And the person who designed the chair probably never touches it. It's like, here's this chair design, figure out how to make it, and somebody else figures out the injection molding. I mean, this is going on for a long time. There's also this real divorce from nature. We see this as part of moving out of this agrarian lifestyle into this urban setting. But just I think the nature of the materials that they're using and the processes are very kind of separate from the natural ones. And there's this general commodification of everything, including humanity. Their response to this in the arts and crafts movement was this real kind of celebration of the handmade instead as a replacement, and an advocacy for skilled workers. This guy here, he's making this wagon wheel in this very old-fashioned way. It's the way wagon wheels were made for, probably centuries. But in this process, it's a really impressive process in a lot of ways. He understands this material that he's working with in a very intimate way. The tooling and the material have a very specific relationship to each other, where that blade finds the grain of that wood, and the craftsman draws through that. So it cuts along the grain. So you can see a really strong piece of material versus cutting across the grain, in which it's more likely to break. So there's this knowledge and this process really embedded in the tool, in the history, in this craftsman's hands. So I think that in that appreciation of nature, I think carries through in the understanding of materials as well. And these arts and crafts guys are very much in support of these kind of socialist ideas. Okay, next. Ultimately, like in a lot of ways, these guys, their argument was sort of futile, right? They couldn't really stop like this tide of industrialization, and they're sort of like this cute little thing on the side of history in many ways. So part of this is because they didn't really address the extent and the pace of change that was coming. That really hadn't been seen before. I don't think anybody could understand how radical that is. And this is really true for us even more now. These Fordist approaches to manufacturing and this Taylorist approach to managing a workforce was incredibly efficient, and that's powerful. New technologies replace nature, and capitalism is always really swift at cooperating, then co-opting any movement. So I think that this quote is really speaks to me when I read it, and then I realized like this was 1931 when he said this. Like it seems even more true today. Okay. So in this era of digital and now biological fabrication, I think that there's some kind of ironically ways in which we can respond to a lot of the complaints that these guys in the arts and crafts movement had, and actually maybe possibly attain some of their ideals. And this lack of variety and quality, we've talked a lot about how digital fabrication permits this great variety in modes of production. Also, things could be made actually quite well with these tools. And I think as we move into biological materials, we can have improved mechanical and aesthetic qualities. We don't have to have the same, everything doesn't have to be like metal or plastic. Also, resolving this issue of the separation of design and making. When you're making something digitally fabricated, the file that you use to draw the thing is the file that makes the thing. So there is this real intimate connection in designing and making. You can't just draw up this chair and hand it to the chair making guy and say, figure this out. You draw your chair and you hand it to the robot, and the robot makes what that chair looks like. It may not be what you want, but you have to understand how those things work together. So ironically, there is this sort of intimacy to the making process when you have robots make everything. So with biological growth, that making is coded into the cell that does the making and makes up that structure. So that notion of growth is sort of the most intimate version of design and making together. Okay, next. This divorce from nature, I think we kind of resolve as well in a lot of ways, and that we kind of have to have this even greater understanding of nature when we're working with biological materials. It's a less romantic notion of nature, but I think it really allows for a more complex, or appreciation of the complexity of these systems and the interdependent ecologies of nature. But ultimately, I think that a very new understanding of nature is required. This is a quote from a meeting from a friend of mine who works at NASA. A bunch of engineers. They're realizing like, oh, this technology is great. It's going to outpace our ability to know what to do with it. So this is, I think, where the importance of imagination and artists is really relevant. So, I mean, honestly, there's not a whole lot of bioprinting in art and design. As we've seen today, this stuff's hard, and it's expensive for the most part. So there's a few things that are really important moving towards this stuff. And one of the most important things is this kind of speculative fiction about this stuff. So this is the in vitro meat cookbook by this group called Next Nature. And just the fact that you have this makes you imagine, like, I think of like my mom's Betty Crocker cookbook at home that we sort of grew up with. And what's this mean to have like in vitro meat? So I think that it brings us into this more kind of intimate space that's really important for helping us to imagine these things.
The sausage a little bit.
They had this kind of fake company called Rayfish Shoes, where you could pay to have a rayfish genetically engineered to make a really cool custom pattern, and then they would make shoes out of it. The company didn't exist, but it raises important questions. I'd say the other way in which we're moving towards this idea is through biomedics. We see this a lot in architecture. Next. These are really beautiful chairs by Joris Laarman, looking at doing finite element analysis and kind of mimicking the way bone is really efficient structural materials. I think the other is just really capitalizing on biomaterials. This is, obviously now we're getting really, really close to this. So this is the Silk Pavilion by Mary Oxman and her group at MIT. So this is a basic structure was fabricated digitally based on patterns that these silkworms do, and then it was populated with silkworms, and they finished up the structure. Next. Suzanne Lee's work is pretty great. She uses microbial cellulose to these bacteria make these really fine fibers of cellulose that grow into a nice mat. Then you can dry those out, dye them, and make clothing out. So Peter Dribble did this really great project here where he packs in sand, pumps in some particular bacteria and some other things that they like, and they basically convert this sand into concrete. So just keep going quickly. Phil Ross does really great work with mycelium. So in these structures, they're packing a mold full of usually agricultural waste, and then mushrooms. So mycelium are basically the root structure of a mushroom, and it fuses that material together. So he's combining that with wood elements to make really nice furniture. So then there's some really kind of crazy stuff in tissue culturing. A lot of this comes out of University of West Australia, as Alberto was mentioning earlier, in this group Symbiotica. So next. So Oren Katz is really heavily pushing into that stuff. This stuff kind of tends to the little bit creepy side, but I think, but it's still important work. Amy Compton's doing interesting work. She's a textile artist, and she's looking at using these woven structures, embroidery, and knit structures as scaffoldings for tissue engineering. I think we also have, coming from the other side, we have really creative use of 3D printing. So these guys, Jimmy Research, I don't know if you met some of these characters, really coming out of this as a response to this RepRap movement, looking at 3D printing as an open platform for experimentation. Unfold is a really great group, and looking at ceramic printing, and just the way in which they build community around their work is really important. This is Amanda's work, where she's like doing some kind of weird printing stuff. Just like, let's squirt some weird stuff out. Let's blend up your old clothes and mix it with some bioplastics, and just have a playful attitude to this. Okay, next. This is Lucas's piece where he made a cloud printer. So he created this little actuator that has an e-cigarette that it draws, and then it just prints like these little puffs of smoke. So it's this very poetic approach to this. And the way that you program this, it's not so much like, you know, writing G-code to fabricate a thing. It's more like you're choreographing a printer. Next. Will Short, these are all projects from our students at MICA. Will Short is kind of like printing sounds, we could say. He took the regular extruder off of his printer and made a bed of magnetic tape and mounted a tape head on there so you can print sounds, lay sound tracks down, and then come back and read them as well. Right now he's working on some projects with the Inkjet, so he kind of hacked this Inkjet with this platform called the Ink Shield, and he's hooking that up to his printer, and we're kind of making some kind of custom software for controlling that. Which is the same platform that these folks at BioCurious used to make their really kind of hacky but nice bioprinter. So it uses Inkjet technology and like a hard drive, I think, that they hacked together, and they're printing bacteria, so modified to produce green fluorescent protein. This is a project with Corey Vince's friend and some other folks, where they're printing not quite living things, but these kind of this chemistry that's very, very close to living structures.
Very close to what?
Living forms. Can you go back one? This actually has some like kind of weird similarities to Axel's work, in that this is pulling thin layers of microbial cellulose onto these rolls and making these kind of sheets of the stuff. This is one artist and a group of people at the Bog Society. So this is one of the prints we did here at Bugs with a lot of great help. Steve worked on this a lot. Tom worked on this some, and we had some great people working on just culturing our plant cells. So this is just our first print with plant cells. You know, we're definitely not in a place where this is growing into any kind of tissue at this point, but kind of our first forays into this from about a year or so ago. I think this is one of the more advanced projects. This is a piece where they took some cells from one of Van Gogh's descendants and cultured those and populated this printed scaffolding here, and so they recreated Van Gogh's ear with the idea, and had some electronics embedded in it so you could talk to the ear. Van Gogh could hear you, maybe do something. So, but I think that's it. Thanks. Any questions? All right, good. We can talk later if there are. I think I'd like to just bring up a few people who really helped with this. Steve, Lai, John, just to really say thanks to everybody here. So come on up, guys. So it was a lot of work from everybody here. I just wanted to say thanks. Yeah. And thank you so much to all of our speakers. You know, nobody got big fat checks for coming here and talking. So it's really,
We just didn't pay you. Everybody else.
They got tired of listening to us beg. So like,
I tell you, Ryan and Steve spent a lot of late nights here, you know, getting stuff ready. So get test personally with a lot.
and all this, and we've been doing this whole series the past few weeks now on bioprinting, and it's just thanks to all the people who've been coming out to that like every weekend in a row. Like that's pretty amazing, and hanging out. So it's a really great community that we're building. Please come back and work with us. We've got printers here, projects going. I'm sure after this you've got ideas, and we want to work together to make all those happen.
don't let it end here, man.
Yeah.